On a crowded November evening in 1987, King's Cross Station pulsed with life. Smoke then drifted silently from beneath a wooden escalator, erupting seconds later into a fireball that killed 31 and wounded over 100. Official reports named a cigarette match, but survivors described it as a rolling detonation, and crucial ignition stages remained scientifically unexplained. If this is the deadliest underground disaster on record, then why do so many fundamental questions still haunt its origin? The stakes of what really happened beneath London's busiest hub begin here. King's Cross St Pancras in 1987 was more than a station. It was a living maze beneath central London. Trains from 6 underground lines converged here, weaving together thousands of daily journeys. Above ground, the mainline terminal buzzed with travellers heading north and south. Below, a network of tiled corridors, stairwells and deep-level escalators connected platforms, ticket halls and exits. Each layer told a different story. Victorian brickwork, pre-war timber and concrete poured in the post-war rush to modernise. Over decades, new passages and utilities threaded through the old, leaving behind a patchwork of blueprints, some lost, some never updated. By the evening of November 18, 1987, over 100,000 passengers had passed through King's Cross. Rush hour pressed bodies shoulder to shoulder along narrow walkways and down towards the escalators. The Piccadilly Line main escalator, installed in 1939, was a wooden giant, its moving steps and balustrades oiled and polished by decades of use. Maintenance teams worked in shifts, but the station's age and sheer volume of traffic meant that dust, grease and litter collected in hidden crevices beneath the moving stairs. Few commuters ever thought about what lay below their feet as they hurried between platforms. The station's complexity was not just architectural. Evacuation plans had to account for multiple levels, blind corners and choke points where crowds could bottleneck. Emergency exits were scattered, some tucked behind locked doors, others poorly signposted. Staff relied on memory and routine, moving between old and new sections that did not always line up as intended. Even routine incidents, a lost child or a stalled escalator, could bring the flow to a standstill. When disaster struck, this labyrinth became a trap. The fire's toll, 31 dead and over 100 injured, was shaped not only by the flames but by the very bones of King's Cross itself. The station's hidden spaces, its layered history and its ceaseless crowds all played a part in what became the deadliest underground fire in British history. Beneath the wooden escalator on the Piccadilly line, something was quietly burning. For nearly half an hour, the fire smouldered out of sight, feeding on grease, dust and decades of detritus hidden below the moving steps. Passengers hurried overhead, unaware of the heat building below. Station staff reported a faint smell and at one point, an unusual glow beneath the escalator, but no one could see open flames. The fire seemed contained, its presence marked only by occasional wisps of smoke curling from the machinery. At 7:45 in the evening, everything changed in less than 2 seconds. Survivors later described what happened next as a rolling detonation. A pressure wave punched through the ticket hall before the first tongue of flame appeared. Glass shattered, people were knocked off their feet. One commuter remembered a blast of hot air so forceful it felt like being hit by a train. Another described a firewind, a wall of flame and smoke that swept across the concourse, swallowing everything in its path. The transition was absolute. Moments before, the fire was nearly invisible, its heat trapped below the escalator decking. Then, without warning, a jet of flame shot up the shaft and erupted into the open space above. The fireball consumed the ticket hall in a matter of seconds, reaching temperatures estimated at over 600 degrees Celsius. Those closest to the blast had no chance to escape. Smoke and heat surged through corridors and stairwells, filling every corner of the underground maze. No one present that night could explain how a hidden smolder became a station-wide inferno so quickly. The pressure wave, the speed of the fireball, the suddenness of the transformation, all defied what fire science then understood. The mechanism behind this explosive escalation would puzzle investigators for years to come, demanding answers that standard theories could not fully supply. The explanation that would soon dominate the official record began with a phrase never heard in fire science before 1987, the trench effect. Investigators described how heat and smoke trapped in the inclined shaft beneath the wooden escalator crept along the trench, gradually preheating the timber ahead. When conditions were right, the theory said, the entire length of the escalator flashed over in an instant, sending a jet of flame into the ticket hall above. This mechanism, drawn from computer models and a handful of scale experiments, was used to account for the sudden, explosive transition that stunned survivors and responders alike. Yet the trench effect was a new idea, born from this disaster, not from decades of prior research. The laboratory tests that followed, conducted at the Buxton facility, used 1 to 10 and 1 to 3 scale models of the escalator shaft. Flames in these models lay down along the incline, eventually producing a rapid upward fire jet. But the experiments faced real limits. The models could not perfectly reproduce the age, geometry, or fuel load of the actual King's Cross escalator. There was no continuous photographic or sensor record of the real ignition sequence. The critical moment, the leap from hidden smolder to fireball, remained out of sight, reconstructed from damage and survivor testimony rather than direct observation. A computational fluid dynamics modeler, who reviewed the evidence years later, pointed out that even the best simulations of the time relied on assumptions about the distribution of grease, the state of the ventilation, the moisture in the timber, and the exact sequence of ignition. The term trench effect itself was coined only after the fire, retrofitted to explain what had already happened. No peer-reviewed study since has fully replicated a fireball of such speed and violence in a geometry exactly matching King's Cross. The official explanation, while plausible, rests on models and tests that leave gaps that persist in the scientific record and in the memories of those who witnessed the disaster firsthand. Smoke at King's Cross behaved in ways that confounded both firefighters and the engineers who later tried to reconstruct the disaster. In the early stages beneath the escalator, smoke collected in a dense, low-lying basin, refusing to rise as expected for hot gases in a confined shaft. For more than 20 minutes, this basin hugged the trench, barely seeping into the ticket hall above. Standard fire models predicted a steady upward drift, but the real plume remained trapped, as if held back by invisible barriers. When the fireball erupted, this stagnant pool of smoke and heat was suddenly unleashed. The transition was not gradual. Within seconds, thick, toxic smoke surged through corridors and stairwells, overwhelming escape routes and filling the concourse. Survivors described a sudden wall of smoke, moving faster than anyone could run. Fire scientists, working from damage patterns and survivor accounts, tried to reconstruct the airflows that allowed such a dramatic shift. But the station's ventilation system offered few answers. Decades of alterations had produced a tangle of ducts, fans and grills, many undocumented or mapped only on outdated blueprints. After the fire, investigators discovered that several ventilation fans were running in unexpected modes, their actual operation not matching their control panel settings. Some fans meant to extract air were pushing it in, others were switched off entirely. Without a complete, accurate map of airflow at the time of the disaster, even the best computer models could only guess at how smoke moved through the labyrinth. The lack of reliable documentation left a gap that no experiment or simulation could fully close. For those who tried to understand the disaster, the station's hidden air currents remained as elusive as the fire's origin itself. Maintenance at King's Cross. St. Pancras was never a simple checklist. Decades of repairs, rushed cleaning, and shifting priorities left a trail of paperwork that rarely matched the reality beneath the escalators. On Escalator 4, the official maintenance logs were a patchwork, entries sometimes missed, sometimes duplicated, and often at odds with what staff remembered. Grease buildup under the moving stairs was supposed to be monitored and cleared, yet by 1987 investigators found thick layers of oily residue mixed with dust and discarded tickets. Some records showed recent cleaning, But physical evidence told a different story. Staff on duty the day of the fire later recalled a smell of burning and a faint glow under the escalator hours before disaster struck. Those details never made it into the official logs. The inquiry into the fire faced a puzzle. There was no single, continuous maintenance history for the escalator where the fire began. Instead, fragments of reports and contradictory entries made it impossible to trace exactly when grease or debris had last been cleared. This raised a difficult question. Could the fire have been prevented if records had been clearer, or if cleaning had been more thorough? A culture of underreporting small fires on wooden escalators meant that minor incidents, brief smoulders, and faint scorch marks were often handled quietly and rarely escalated to official reports. Burn marks found on the skirting board suggested this was not the first time heat had built up out of sight. The official explanation settled on a discarded match as the likely cause. Yet matches had been banned on the underground for years. There was no CCTV showing a passenger lighting up, no eyewitness recalling the flick of a match at the critical moment. Investigators did find several spent matches among the debris below the steps, and laboratory tests showed that grease-soaked dust could indeed smoulder for long periods before erupting. But the distribution of grease and burn patterns did not fit a single-point ignition. The match theory remained probable, not proven, an answer built as much from what was missing in the records as from what was found. For those who sifted through the logs, the greatest uncertainty was not just how the fire started, but whether it might have been stopped before it ever began. In the confusion that followed the first eruption of flame, some details slipped through the cracks of the official record. Among the most puzzling accounts is the report of a thin blue flame seen flickering beneath the escalator minutes before the fireball. Witnesses described it as faint, almost ethereal, unlike the yellow-orange glow of burning wood or grease. In fire science, a blue flame often signals the presence of burning gas or electrical arcing, not just smouldering debris. Yet the inquiry found no conclusive physical evidence of an electrical fault. The escalator's wiring and motor systems, already decades old and repeatedly modified, were too badly damaged in the aftermath to yield clear answers. Forensic specialists could not rule out the possibility that an arc or fault had contributed to the ignition, but the official verdict leaned heavily on the match and grease scenario, supported by the spent matches found in the debris. The story of the fire's origin is tangled with these competing fragments, eyewitnesses recalling sparks, the elusive blue flame, and the absence of direct proof. It is a reminder that in the chaos of disaster, not every anomaly leaves a trace that can be measured or explained. In the days after the fire, 31 victims were identified by loved ones, by dental records, by personal effects. Yet one man, known only as Body 33, lay unnamed for years. He had no identification, no family immediately searching for him, no missing persons report that matched the coroner's files. Only much later, after renewed investigation and piecing together the fragments of his life, was he identified as Alexander Fallon, a 73-year-old Scotsman living alone in London. His journey from anonymity to a name reflected the gaps in record keeping and the limits of forensic science at the time. For months and then years, his presence in the official lists was a quiet question mark, a reminder of how easily an individual can be lost in the machinery of a mass casualty event, and how hard it can be to restore a sense of personhood after the fact. The mystery of Body 33 lingers as a human echo of the technical uncertainties that still surround the King's Cross fire. Some of the most telling evidence from the King's Cross fire has never been seen by the public. Early photographs taken in the first hours after the disaster remain locked away in archives. Investigators collected a detailed visual record, images of the ignition site, the spread of charring along the escalator, even the pattern of debris and burn marks beneath the steps. Yet only a small fraction of these photos ever appeared in official reports. Requests for access made by researchers and journalists over the years have been met with silence or redaction. The health and safety executive's Buxton laboratory removed escalator components and timber samples for testing, but many of these artifacts were never returned to public archives. Their current whereabouts are unclear. Technical analysis reports, including those that underpinned the trench effect theory, were summarized for the Fennell inquiry, but not released in full. The original laboratory notebooks, temperature records, and high-speed footage from scale model experiments are withheld from the public domain. Archivists who have tried to catalogue the holdings describe incomplete inventories and unexplained gaps, with certain files marked as restricted and unavailable for consultation. For independent investigators, this lockdown on primary evidence has become a barrier. Without access to the full photographic and physical record, it is impossible to verify the official reconstruction or to test alternative theories. The absence of these materials leaves key questions unanswered, not just about the fire's cause and progression, but about the limits placed on public scrutiny. As the years pass, the demand for transparency grows, pressing for a release of the sealed images and artifacts that could illuminate what really happened beneath King's Cross that night. Blueprints for King's Cross in 1987 were a patchwork of old plans, partial updates, and undocumented alterations. The original architectural drawings for the Piccadilly escalator shaft, installed in 1939, had been revised, redrawn, and sometimes lost as decades of repairs and upgrades piled up. Investigators working after the fire found themselves relying on incomplete diagrams and best guesses, forced to reconstruct the station's hidden geometry from fragments. Even the most detailed maps left out voids, service ducts, or patched over repairs that might have shaped the fire's path. When fire scientists turned to computer modelling, they faced a data void. The Harwell Laboratory's early simulations and the Buxton scale model tests were built on assumptions about timber layout, grease deposits, and airflow, none of them fully verified against the real, as-built station. Key measurements like wood species, moisture content, or the exact mix of paint and debris were either missing or estimated. No modern, peer-reviewed computational fluid dynamics study exists that can test the trench effect or the speed of the fireball with all inputs known. The original model files, lab notes, and calibration records from 1987 to 1988 are not publicly available. CFD experts today point out that without precise geometry, material properties, and ventilation data, any attempt to simulate the King's Cross fire is limited to educated guesswork. The modelling gap is not just a technical shortfall, it is a barrier to understanding whether the official explanation holds up under the scrutiny of modern science. Until the raw data, blueprints, and experimental records are released, the full story of how the fire moved through King's Cross will remain unresolved. Today, London's underground is rebuilt with steel, sensors, and digital monitoring, yet the gaps exposed by King's Cross still echo in hidden systems and incomplete records worldwide. When safety depends on invisible details, unanswered questions are not just history, they are a warning. What we cannot see or prove can still ignite. The next disaster waits where certainty runs out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.